Welcome to my farm buildings negative painting tutorial. This is a narrated step-by-step tutorial at normal speed. It's the companion to my negative painting demonstration video, which is set to music at 3x speed. The value sketch on the right, which was a value sketch I did on location some time ago, was the reference for this painting. To begin, I've drawn a very simple sketch on my work surface, and then I'm going to come in with a 1-inch flat wash brush, and I'm just going to lay down a middle value tone across a large portion of this composition. And you can see that I'm gradating in a variety of color. So I started this wash with gamboge, and I've put in some quinacridone and coral. And I'm not using any masking for this painting. I'm just working around the shapes that I've got in my composition. And I'll be doing a lot of negative painting in this piece. I'm applying this wash wet on dry, so I didn't wet the paper before I started to put this wash down. And that's important when I'm trying to keep these clean edges around the outer edges of these buildings. And as I start to put in a shadow here, you can see how very narrow that linear white shape is that I saved. And again, there's no masking, it's just painting around it. And I can do that because I'm controlling the bead of my water and where it's going. And because of the resistance of the paper, that area is just going to stay white. And now if I was working wet into wet, I wouldn't be able to keep that clean linear shape there. It would just the colors would just merge together, and I would lose the white of the paper there on that narrow of a linear shape. I've started to work in some sap green in a few places here in the wash. And you can see that I've got a shadow side to these buildings, and I have a side that I'm keeping the white of the paper as if the sun or the light is hitting that side of the building, and the light is coming from the right of this composition. I've deepened the red tone a little bit by adding some royal blue, and I've just made 2 marks there with a cerulean blue that I was going to try and work in, but I really don't like it too much, so I'm probably just going to leave that color alone there and stay away from it the rest of this through the rest of this painting. One of the things I want to point out is I've covered a large area of this work surface with a middle value wash, and the building structures are starting to emerge. And to this point, I've done all this with a 1-inch flat brush. I haven't taken a small brush and tried to render these buildings. I've been working a lot in negative space and letting these buildings emerge, but it's all been done with a 1-inch flat brush. Now I've dried my paper, and I'm going to start working with a smaller round brush, and I'm working with a little bit darker value, and I'm going to be more deliberate with the application of my paint and start working smaller shapes. I often start my paintings by working with the larger shapes first, lighter values, and then working down in size to the shapes that I'm painting as I start to work with darker and darker values and build my layers and start to build depth to the composition. Now I'm working in negative space behind these building structures and giving the suggestion of pine trees there that are much darker value. And the colors there, again, is sap green, and then the very, very dark tone that I have there right now is a mixture of quinacridone and coral with royal blue in it, and it's got quite a bit of royal blue in it to give it that very dark value, and it's almost a purplish tone. And now that yellow tone is a gamboge with quinacridone and coral, and just a touch of some royal blue in there. It gives it that kind of gold color overall. I want to bring in some more intense color in this composition, and I'm going to start applying this gamboge, quinacridone and coral mixture behind this building, and I'm going to bring that same tone into the shadowed side of this structure, and I'm just going to let the edge of the building disappear into the tone that's also behind the building, and just let those edges get lost a little bit. And I'm probably going to do a little something to make that more defined as this develops, but it doesn't bother me at all that that's just one tone that goes from the side of the building right into the background. After I've applied that tone, I'm going to take a fine mist spray and diffuse some of that color and let it gradate into one another. Now I have to be careful there on where I've painted the side of that building where I'm at with my brush right now. As I'm using that spray, I don't want to get it into that building or I'll lose that clean edge that I have. So as I sprayed that, I was aware of that, and I made sure I kept it going away from that edge so that I can maintain the sharpness of the edge and preserve the white of the paper. Because once you go in with a fine mist spray and spray down an area, even though you started wet on the dry, once you put that spray, you come in with your paintbrush. From there on, you're working wet into wet, and that's going to give you softer edges and gradation of color. It's right here as I'm applying this paint. I'm painting an area that I had sprayed, and so I've basically transitioned from wet into dry to painting wet into wet. Now, once I come back in and dry the surface with my hair dryer, I'll be back to painting wet on dry, and I'll have more control over the application of the paint, and I'll be painting sharper edges. I'm going to do some more painting on the shadow side of these buildings and on the area on the underside of the roof, and I'm using this gamboge, quinacridone, and coral mixture that gives almost a burnt sienna tone, and I'm using that to work into the composition on some of the darker areas. At this point, I'm going to begin working some of the darker value areas. I'm working the interior of this open door to this building, and I'm using a very dark mixture, which is a combination of quinacridone coral and royal blue. It's a very deep red tone that I'm using. As I start to build these areas of darker values, I'm going to start to get more of the feeling of depth in this composition. I'm working on some of these window shapes on the buildings now, and as I paint this, I'm given a suggestion that these are 4-pane windows, and to do that, I'm painting in each area where there would be a pane of glass, and given the suggestion that they're broken up, and I don't make each of the 4 square areas the same. And when I touch it with this Kleenex, it helps just vary the values and the shading in the window, and just makes it a little bit more interesting than if I had just put it down with my brush, that one value, and just left it. And here again, you can see I've done the same thing with that window. I don't necessarily complete every area the same. I make them all look a little bit different, and I don't complete the whole edge. I leave some of it disappear, and it makes for a much more interesting look. In this area right here, I'm giving that suggestion that there's these panels are separated there, and that's how these barns are often constructed. And I'm not overdoing it. I'm just coming in and putting touches of value. And here again, I'm working in a shadowed area with these dark values, but I don't make one solid line. That would be not very interesting. So I break these lines up, these linear shapes up in these shadowed areas, and I'm making smaller shapes that lead into another smaller shape. So it gives a suggestion of that continuation of that line without actually painting the entire area as a solid shape. Now I'm taking a 1-inch brush here with a wash of this quinacridone coral royal blue mixture that I've been using. It makes for just a deeper red tone, and I've thinned this down though, and I'm putting this wash on the shadow side of the building. And I didn't paint the whole shape. I've left some areas untouched. It just, again, it breaks up that shape and makes it more interesting, and it contours the surface of the building. And if you can make these marks that contour the building and help describe the surface, again, this makes for a much more interesting painting rather than just painting one flat tone over the whole side. Here I'm doing a little bit more detailed brushwork with still a darker value. I use this process throughout the whole painting where I'll build the value and I'll dry the painting. I'll come back in and I'll apply still a darker value, and it's just continual buildup of layers and gradual buildup of values that starts to build depth and really bring life to the overall painting. One of the things to keep in mind when you apply your watercolor and dry it, which I do frequently through my painting process, the tone that you've laid down, the value you've laid down, as it dries, it gets much lighter. So sometimes you think you've applied a very dark value, and once it's dry, it's not quite as dark as you thought it was going to be. And then you come back in. At least what I do is I come back in and I build a darker value until I really get the value that I'm after once it's dried. I'm building my values in the background a little bit here in these trees, and gives them more suggestion of the tree shapes behind here, which send the building forward. And as I do this, I'm using the same color mixture that I was using on the building structures. And if you recall, my reference was just a simple value sketch that I had, and it's not a photograph of the scene. If you were using this photograph and you were trying to copy a photograph, your approach would be much different, especially with your color choices. But I'm just using an expression of color of the scheme that I chose to use for this painting, so it's more an artistic expression than trying to reproduce a photograph. And now I have a brush that is just loaded with water, and I'm taking that and doing some lifting on these darker background shapes. So I'm giving the suggestion of tree trunks here, and to do, like I said, to do that I've got a flat brush that's got some clear water loaded into it. It just makes it a damp brush, and then I wet the area with a brush and lift off with a Kleenex, and it just gives a subtle suggestion of linear shapes on these darker valued shapes, which give a suggestion of tree trunks. And I've switched my brush here to one that has a little bit more spring in it, and that does a better job of cutting through the paint to remove that. And as I drag that through a darker value, you can see right there, it carries that value up into the lighter area a little bit. And so you get this kind of a light on dark shape that transitions to a dark on a light shape, just because you're dragging a darker valued application of paint. You're taking your clear water and you're dragging that value up over a lighter valued area, and it's a very subtle suggestion of these linear shapes. Here I've got a mixture that's got a little bit more quinacridone and coral into it, so it has a little bit more color than the darker value that I've been working with. And I'm working on the shadow side of this building, and I'm breaking this shape up some, and I'm using brush strokes to try and help describe the plane of this side of the building. And it, like I said, it breaks this shape up and makes it much more interesting. And I'm in this phase of my painting where I'm going to be doing this in a number of areas. And this is where I'm talking about trying to contour the surface to help describe it. And you can use that with the direction of the brush, the shapes that you're putting in. Again, this helps build interest into the painting. And right now I'm using a 1/2-inch flat brush to do to make the marks that I'm making with my paint. And here's where I've used in my other videos where I've mentioned to get the most out of your brush. So you can do a lot more than just make a 1/2-inch line or brush stroke with a 1/2-inch flat brush. You can use all edges of the brush and the corner of the brush to make marks that are very interesting and have quite a variety. And sometimes when I'm working with a flat brush like that, I roll it around and as I make my brush stroke, and it has a bit of spontaneity, and it makes for a livelier application of the paint. But you can get a lot out of a brush like this. Here I'm just painting the values between these tree trunks, the suggestion of tree trunks that I put in by lifting, and now this helps strengthen the suggestion of the trees there by putting these darker valued brush marks down. I'm going to darken the value on these tree shapes a little bit, and now you notice here I'm using the same brush. I haven't changed my brush. I'm still using this 1/2-inch flat brush, and I'm using it to describe these tree shapes. And so I've taken this same brush and I've applied a wash to the side of the building, and I've come in and put darker values in between the areas that I lifted off to help strengthen the suggestion of tree trunks. And now I've come in and I've put marks down to give a stronger suggestion of pine trees here in the background. And I've done it all with the very same brush. And it's not like a small pointed round brush. It's just 1/2-inch flat. And I get that variety of application just by using different areas or different edges on that same brush. Here I've changed my brush. I could still be using the same flat brush and making some of these marks, but I know there's some areas where I'm going to want to have a little bit more control over the mark that I'm putting down. And right now what I'm doing is I'm taking this dark value and I'm just putting some lost and found kind of linear shapes along the edges of these roofs to help it, the suggestion here that there's that edge on it without painting the whole edge. So it's kind of a dot and dash approach I'm taking here, and the eye completes that line that follows the roof line on the edge of it. Now I'm working my way around my composition, and I've got this very sharp point quill brush that I'm using, and I have a very dark value, and I'm just moving around the composition, putting in some just little dark marks that help give a little bit more description to what might be going on this building structure or in the trees. They're just dark valued marks, and they suggest cracks in the edge of the structure, or a shadow on the side of a building or on a plane. It's just a way to build interest into this painting and help break these shapes up a little bit more and give some detail, or the suggestion of detail, without really sitting down and trying to render something. It's just those marks that they give interest, and they help build depth into the composition. I'm putting some of these darker valued brush marks even in some of these darker valued shapes to give subtle areas of interest. And here you can see just a few little marks on some of these light valued areas starts to bring some dimension to it. You can see where I had put some, I'm putting some in the contours of the land, just a few little marks, and now it takes on the feeling of that there's a horizontal plane there in the background. Here I've taken my brush and I've loaded it with a much more intense red color, and I'm making some of these marks that stand out not only because of the value but because of the intensity of the color. I've been using fairly muted colors up to this point, and this red is much brighter, and now that helps starts to bounce the eye around a little bit and draw the eye in for some of these where some of these brighter tones are. And I'm putting some of those brighter brush strokes in some darker valued areas, and I'm doing them on the edge of darker valued areas, and I'm doing on the lighter valued areas also, where I'll get even a greater contrast of color. But I'm just moving around, so that helps. I'm kind of weaving this color into this brighter color into the composition, just by putting, again, just some brush marks down. As I put these brush marks down, I'm still trying to contour the surface that's on. That does a couple things. It helps build interest, and then it also helps further describe that surface. When doing a landscape, it helps to have somewhere some form of a horizontal plane or a line. It just helps give balance and makes it feel right as a landscape. Just as you look in the distance on the landscape, you normally see a horizon line or some type of a horizontal plane, and just the suggestion somewhere of a horizontal line or horizontal plane just gives a completely different feeling to your composition. Now I'm really taking some bright color. This is gamboge with a little bit of quinacridone and coral, and I wanted to brighten that some of the areas of this painting up a little bit. Again, I've been working with some muted tones, and I wanted to get a little bit more intense color into this painting. So here I've got this soft wash brush, and I've got this gamboge color, and I'm working around in a few different areas of the composition. Because I'm developing this painting as a whole, and it's more one of artistic expression, I didn't stop just by putting, say, a yellow tone, this tone in the sky. I'm working it throughout the whole composition, and you can see that I'm just applying some interesting brush strokes as I put this down, and I softened some of the edges here and there with a spray bottle. And here I'm going to take this and put a little bit more here in the background, and maybe suggest that there's another tree line here using this gold colored tone. Here I'm going to make just a few final brush strokes using kind of a yellowish green color. And here again I'm just making some marks in various areas of the composition that help describe the surface. And I make those brush marks and then I just move on. But it's kind of a yellow green that I'm applying there. And this is my painting, Farm Buildings, and this is a still shot taken under the lights. Sometimes when watching the video and videotaping, the colors don't quite have the intensity that they actually have, and this still shot under the bright lights really starts to show that. You can see some of these brush strokes I made with a little more intense color, the quinacridone coral and the yellow green, how I've made some of these marks around the composition, and it does a nice job of providing some interest and helping to describe those surfaces. I hope you enjoyed this video and found some inspiration. Don't forget to like it, share it, and share your comments. And if you want to get notified when I release future videos, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.